everybody for coming tonight. I want to talk to you a little bit about where I come from and my history in law enforcement. I also would like to congratulate Mr. Frank Morris for his service. It's sad to hear that he's going to be retiring. He was a good man. I don't envy that job at all that he conducted. I was a party chairman in Jones County for a year and a half, and it is a very important, very important job. As I was coming over here, I noticed that it was really hot, and I thought, a little closer?
Better.
All right. Does that sound a little better? Anyways, I was coming over here, I noticed it was really hot outside, and I got to thinking how nice it would be to be at the beach today. And maybe that's on the agenda for tomorrow, who knows. But anyway, last time I was at the beach, I had seen a lot of cars driving down, making ruts in the beach. A little while later, one car went down and got stuck in the sand. So he went and got somebody else to pull him out. So another car went, got stuck in the sand too. This happened 3 times. I think 3 cars got stuck in the sand. And then I saw a gentleman come along in a 4-wheel drive pickup. And he drove on the sand that was packed. He turned around and he pulled each car out. And I got to thinking how that relates to what we're doing here. In the last several years, we're stuck in a rut. Everybody keeps going down the same path, doing the same thing over and over again. And like the definition of insanity goes, if you keep doing the same thing, you're not going to get different results. So I come with a different approach and a different perspective on things. I want to talk about my experiences. My grandmother grew up on the Cherokee Indian Reservation in Oklahoma. She moved to Texas as a teenager and married, and of course gave birth to my mother and several other siblings. And my father's family was from Texas. She used to tell me stories of their way of life and taught a lot of wisdom. I used to stay with her as my mother and father was working, particularly during the summer. But value, integrity, and hard work has always been in my family. I came from humble beginnings. My father was a truck driver. He drove for 35 years. At 55, he retired from the Teamsters and then began a carpet cleaning company. So all during my junior high and high school, I was a late in life child. So I was a teenager by the time I was in junior high when my father retired. So I worked the carpet cleaning business with him. But my goal, believe it or not, of becoming a police officer was after I got stopped for riding without license plates on a motor scooter in Kansas. We were living in Kansas at the time. And I met the police officer, and I was so impressed with the way he interacted with me and talked to me and trained me and explained the law to me. He wasn't harsh or ugly in any manner, and I was 14 at the time. We could get our license at 14 in Kansas. So he was really good to me, really talked and told me about law enforcement. So when I turned 18, by that time we were already living in Texas again, and my father had started a carpet cleaning business in San Angelo. Well, I thought I want to be in law enforcement. At 18, you're too young to be a police officer, but you can be a security guard. So I became a security guard and working for a security company in San Angelo, and I also took a job at a private prison in Eden, which is where my first wife was from. She was from Eden. So I took a job there and worked as a corrections officer and as a police officer, as a security guard. We didn't make a lot of money doing that, so I needed extra money, and as most kids do, young adults, we go and we ask our parents. And of course, my mom always thought I should continue with the family business, but I wanted to be in law enforcement. So when I asked my parents for money one day, they said, John, there's an extra carpet cleaning machine out in the garage. Why don't you go out there and put it to work and make some money? So the idea of giving a man a fish he'll eat for a day, or teaching a man to fish he'll eat for a lifetime, that was ingrained in me at that moment. And my mom said, if you want money, you go out and you work for it. And that's the same values that I've imposed on my children. They come and ask for money, they ask for extra things, family members do, and we never turn away somebody, but we use the values that we're all taught to teach somebody to help themselves, to solve the problem, not just fix the problem. And that's a big difference on that. I'm not running because of dislike for anybody. I'm not running for dislike of the sheriff. I'm not running for dislike of any of the opponents that I have running for sheriff. I believe that there's a better way, and the Cameron County deserves a better way. There's issues that are going on, the problems that need to be solved. We're not in the Wild West anymore. Carrying a gun and a big stick and and intimidating and coercion, that doesn't work. We have to develop technology. There's so much technology out there. There's so much that they try to use. But the problem is that people that are responsible for investigating and deterring crime are not properly trained. They don't know how to solve the problems. They don't know how to utilize the resources that are available. Just for example, a couple of months ago, there was the sheriff's office that I know of was investigating a theft of a computer. And they used the old school way of trying to bully people and intimidate and coerce. Whenever they were barking up the wrong tree, had they just gone and pinged the computer, they could have found out where the computer was. But they don't know how to do that. They're not trained properly to know how to solve crimes. And so they do things with the old school cowboyish tactics. So we have to develop technology. Now, I'm not saying that we need to launch satellites into space. We obviously don't have the funds for something like that, but the federal government has resources that are freely available to local law enforcement. We need to infuse training from the outside. Now, we can't send all of our deputies to Austin every week for training, but we can bring those trainers here. And that's something that I did when I worked in Indian Lake. I sponsored many training schools, and we brought agencies from McAllen, from Brownsville, federal agencies, state agencies. They all came and trained in Indian Lake. Some of you may remember that. Well, I did that because, one thing, training together builds a bond between agencies. You don't want to just always be seen with the same officers. You need to bring in that cohesiveness and that training together. By bringing training to Indian Lake, Little Indian Lake, people remembered who we were, and they offered their resources. We had raids, we conducted raids, and I called on those agencies to help me to solve some crimes. When I ran for, I'll give you an example for one. I ran for Justice of the Peace as a Republican in 2010, the same year that Carlos Costos ran against John Woods for re-election. And during that time, I was going door to door selling barbecue tickets for a fundraiser. And I went to this one house, and the man invited me in. He said, "Well, I'll buy some barbecue tickets from you," but he said, "But what I really need, John, is someone to help me sell drugs." And I just laughed it off, and I thought, oh my God, what is wrong with this guy? So I left, and the next day, I have a friend. I graduated in San Angelo, and I met many people. Well, one person I met when I was a security guard working at a bank in San Angelo was Bart McElroy. He was a customs agent at the time. Well, I happened to know that he was living here in the valley, and he was working. He was the head of the Haida Task Force. So I went over and I knocked on his door, called him up, went over and said, "Hey, Bart, how you doing?" We talked for a while, and I told him what had happened. So I didn't even tell my wife. She didn't know what was going on. I just kept total radio silence. And I told him what had happened. So that next morning, he gathered up a crew, and we raided 3 houses, and we solved one of the biggest drug scandals that were going on in Indian Lake at that time, but I utilized resources. We all have contacts throughout, even my opponents, they know people throughout the state. They've been around for a long time, as I have. I want to touch on that. I worked 15 years as the chief of police, as a police administrator, from small towns, and that gives an advantage, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But I worked at the state prison system. I started as a security guard, worked at the state prison, became a deputy sheriff, a deputy constable, a jailer, and finally worked my way up as being the chief of police, and that's where I've been for the last 15 years. Working as a chief of police in a small town, we have officers, but one thing it forces you to do is to do everything. You have to get out and interact with the public. Your backup maybe 20, 30 minutes away, so you're out there by yourself, and you have to depend on somebody. But one thing is your skill and your training and your communication ability. You have to depend on that. The other thing is you have to depend on your community to be there to help you, to support you. And you don't gain that support in your community by driving around in a police car, writing tickets with your windows rolled up. You gain that support by rolling your windows down, getting out, talking to people, shaking hands with people, taking off your dark sunglasses, putting your gun where it's concealed, because you're not trying to intimidate anybody, you're trying to be warm and receptive to people and have people come and talk to you. I worked in law enforcement. My gun was always concealed. I never kept it for plain view because I wanted the children to not focus on the gun and the intimidation. I wanted them to focus on interacting and what a police officer is, not to fear him, but to respect him. We've seen here in the valley the compadre system, compromiso system, or compadre system. It happens so often, and we see it. And I mentioned earlier that we need to develop technology and training. Well, the type of officers we need, the type of administrators we need, are ones that use their brains, they use their communications, and they're intelligent. You're not going to get those quality of officers by hiring brother-in-laws and relatives and political supporters. You get the people that belong in those positions based on their hard work, determination, and experience. So we will end that. We will put people in administration that have experience in training and have experience in tracking criminals and have experience in investigating. Everybody that I'll put in my administration is going to have more knowledge in that field, much more knowledge than even I have, because, like Ross Perot says, you don't have to know everything, but you have to know how to hire people that do know what they're doing. Thank you. So that's what we'll